Madame la Secrétaire.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself, and you may begin. You have 10 minutes.
It's different.
Only if you wish to be heard.
It's different in our legislature. I apologize.
Not at all. And you can only have one of them on at a time, just so you know, as you if different people speak.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Chair. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you for inviting us today. My name is Bob Deeth. I'm the MLA for the BC constituency of Maple Ridge Mission. And I'm joined here today by Toby Louis. He's the Executive Director of Corporate Policy and Planning in the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General, and Roman Matejko, who's the Executive Director of Information Communication Technologies Division in the Ministry of Citizen Services of British Columbia. Together, we're here representing the province of British Columbia in these proceedings. I was appointed by Premier John Horgan last year as BC's federal lead on telecommunications. I was tasked with leading a public engagement on cell phone-related issues and representing British Columbians in federal discussions regarding certain telecommunications matters. I'm here today to present key findings from a public survey that BC held last year on cell phones. 15,549 people completed the survey, and the results were included in BC's further comments to the CRTC. The survey was the first ever undertaken by the province regarding cell phone services. It was similar to other citizen engagement initiatives that the province regularly undertakes on programs, policies, and services that affect citizens' lives. The survey provided an important opportunity to hear directly from British Columbians on a variety of cell phone-related issues. My comments and recommendations today are based on the input that we received. Much of what we heard concerns matters under review by the Commission and are the focus of my comments. Now, first, consumers want more affordability and choice in wireless services. The survey result affirmed what many Canadians have been saying for some time. People are highly frustrated and unhappy with the current cost of cell phone services. For example, 86% of respondents do not think the cost of their cell phone services is reasonable, and 79% do not think they get good value from the service. The survey included space for people to provide additional comments on topics that they wanted, and actually over 4,500 respondents provided additional comments criticizing the cost and value of cell phone services. The greatest number called for more affordability and competition. Frequently used terms included expensive, gouging, unfair, monopoly. The high cost of cell phone services has a significant impact on people. Now more than ever, cell phones are a necessity for families, a way to keep safe, stay connected, and receive services. These costs are a staple expense, much akin to monthly transportation or utility costs. Cell phones are no longer a luxury item. For example, in the survey, one person stated that the cost of their family's cell phone service was as high as their monthly food bill. Others described only being able to afford pay-per-use services depending on how much money they had left at the end of the month. So the anger and frustration expressed by people should not be underestimated. It was a clear and simple message that was conveyed by really nearly everyone surveyed. There was a demand for more affordability and choice, and that's what's needed in the retail wireless service market. The province of BC fully supports this goal, as reflected in the BC throne speeches. Our government committed to work on improving cell phone billing transparency for British Columbians, beginning with a public consultation and legislative review. BC also committed to encourage the federal government to deliver more affordable cell phone options, which is why we're here today. British Columbians want government action to improve affordability and choice. Citizens want their governments to take meaningful steps to ensure that wireless services are affordable and that there are sufficient choice in the retail market. Within survey responses, there were a variety of suggestions on how this could be accomplished, and the top four were more retail competitive competition and innovation, government regulation, more choices for low-use and mid-use cell phone plans, and greater ability to pick and choose services in cell phone plans. The key message to draw from this input is that a significant number of people are unhappy with the current state of affairs and want government action to improve improve affordability and choice. There's need for more low-cost, low-usage plans. The province of British Columbia provided information requested by the Commission regarding occasional use or emergency use wireless plans. The evidence from BC's engagement shows that there is a sufficient need for these types of plans. This need is most felt amongst seniors and vulnerable groups who have affordability issues and/or low usage needs. Additional evidence was also presented showing that prepaid plans are prone to other issues. These issues include confusing contract terms, disproportionately high cost for services, and restrictions on those services. Other notable complaints we heard on this topic include unused credits expiring at the end of the service coverage period of a prepaid plan, prepaid plans providing less billing transparency, and aggressive or misleading sales tactics that undermine the intent and effectiveness of existing low-cost or low-usage plans. So these are our recommendations. There's currently an imbalance between the needs of consumers and what is being offered in the retail wireless service market. This applies generally to wireless services as well as to specific lower-cost, low-usage cell phone plans. The province of BC therefore encourages the Commission to address this imbalance and meet its policy objectives to the benefit of all Canadians. The guiding principle should be facilitating greater affordability and choice for families. Now, achieving this goal will require the Commission to take meaningful and effective actions that give Canadians more choice and affordable and innovative services. Furthermore, the province wishes to restate its recommendation for the Commission to exercise its powers to mandate the provision of lower cost, low usage plans for all Canadians, both rural and urban. We also respectfully encourage the Commission to support expediting the next review of the wireless code and the CCTS mandate. We understand that these matters are not under consideration as part of this review. However, we wanted to note that there was a disconcerting number of contract and bill-related issues that were raised by the survey respondents. The survey results also show that there's a very low level of awareness among consumers of both the wireless code and the CCTS complaint process. As a result, people don't know their rights or what their options are if they have complaints. All of these things point to the need for further reviews aimed at making improvements. So in conclusion, Commissioners, to conclude, I've come here to represent the overwhelming number of people who have said they're frustrated with the lack of affordability and choice for cell phone services that they need. And British Columbians know exactly how much they pay for their cell phone services each month, and they're asking for government to do more. That's why I'm here today with 3 recommendations. First, increase competition in the market to help decrease costs for Canadians. Second, mandate lower cost, low use cell phone plans for people who need a basic plan without the bells and whistles. And third, strengthen consumer rights by working to expedite changes to the wireless code. Together, these actions would promote the kind of affordability and choice in cell phone services that British Columbians have long been seeking. And we encourage the Commission to use all of the tools at its disposal to achieve these goals as soon as possible. The province was also pleased to see the federal throne speech committing to cut cell phone costs and wireless services by 25%. We think that this goal is a step towards better cell phone affordability issues that were raised in our survey. I'd like to thank the Commission for allowing the province to intervene and present these at these important hearings. And I hope that our comments and submissions will assist the Commission in the work that lies ahead. I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time and putting in the necessary effort and resources to conduct the survey and put it on the public record. Commissioner Levy.
Yes, thank you. It's a long trip from British Columbia. Thank you for being here. According to your survey, only 1 in 10 respondents, about 9%, agreed with the statement that, quote, "I get good value for my cell phone service." However, according to the survey that was commissioned by the CRTC, nearly half, 46%, agreed with the same statement, and only 26% disagreed. Do you have any views as to why the level of satisfaction differed so much between the two surveys?
Well, I'll turn it over to Toby to answer the specifics around that. My understanding is that there were certainly the phrasing of the questions were quite different. You know, one issue was brought up, for example, that there was a large satisfaction in the CRTC survey for the service people were getting, but the question wasn't asked, were those same people satisfied with the price of the service? And we asked that question. So I think our survey shows that the people that took part in the survey, the vast majority were not happy with the price. Now, there's obviously a difference between the price and the feeling of value or of the service. So, for example, they may feel that their data is fine, that they're not dropping out for their cell phones. So the actual service from the provider is fine. But as we found, if you ask those same people whether they feel that their cell phone cost is too high, the vast majority will say yes. Toby, did you want to just jump in on that? I think you just hit it. Yeah? All right.
I just add, I think that there's differences in terms of the survey questions. I think people also say there's differences in terms of point in time. I do want to say what British Columbians have heard was a point in time, but they did take the time to provide comments to us. So there was an avenue for them to provide comments. Our survey also had a number of other questions which may have influenced or shaped how they provided their perceptions on cost. We were also asking for things in terms of their experiences at point of sale, with their contracts, with billing transparency. So I think you need to look at our survey in a total view, and I think some of that might have shaped their views in terms of the value and the cost response as well.
Have you had a look at the exhibit that was provided on day one of the hearing?
My apologies again. Are you talking about the exhibit 2 and 3?
Yes.
Which sets out the review of the present mobile wireless services,
Yes,
and then of course the other one is the proposed.
The subset of occasional use plans, and Exhibit 3, the review of mobile wireless services.
Yes, and the ones that are proposed by a number of consumer
Right.
groups. Yes, I did see those, yes.
In Exhibit 2, there are many plans at various prices with various features, many under $15. To what extent are consumers' needs for occasional use or emergency use wireless plans being met by these current offerings?
Well, one of the things we heard from the survey was that some of the sales practices that people don't necessarily hear about the plans. So there may be some plans that might be suitable for people, but unfortunately we hear about seniors who are being sold plans that are way more than their needs are. And I do think that if you look at Exhibit 3, for example, some of these ideas here in terms of plans might address some other issues for consumers, and I think that's part of the problem. So one is the lack of knowledge the consumers have, and the other one is the utility of the plans that are being presented. Now, keep in mind that even if someone's going month to month, they still may need to have robust access, say, to the internet to get services, because many government services are going online now, for example. So the utility is an issue too with the Exhibit 2 versus Exhibit 3. So I think that's worth mentioning, but I don't know if Toby, did you want to say a little bit more on that?
As MLAD noted, I think there is a disconnect. We're not saying that there are no low-cost plans available, but from what we've heard from the survey responses, what we've heard is there's a disconnect between what's being offered and what individuals are accessing or purchasing as a service, and the services that they have are not meeting what their needs are. So we're not sure what that disconnect. And one other piece, if I could add, is we did not ask about low-cost plans specifically in our survey, but we had an open-ended comment section. The majority of individuals that responded were on a postpaid plan or a plan, but we did get comments from individuals that said they didn't know. So despite the fact that we didn't ask a question about this, we still did get some comments and questions from individuals that they felt they didn't actually knew about these lower cost plans, or these plans didn't meet their needs.
You've talked a little bit about the gap that you feel is sort of asking to be met with regard to seniors. Are there any other really identifiable gaps that you can see that aren't being met in the market?
Well, if I may, it may stray a little bit away from the specificity of the hearings, but we did hear from seniors, and there's a few things. For example, many seniors don't have access to online billing, for example. So even though the wireless code says you have to provide a paper bill if it is asked for, it doesn't say that you can't charge for it. So seniors are saying we're getting charged in some circumstances for asking for paper bills. So that is an example of something that could be looked at in the review for wireless code. Some of the other things too is, and this came out a lot with seniors, is the aggressive sales tactics where they're being upsold on plans that they just don't need. And so that's a real issue that needs to be addressed. So there may be a plan that would be suitable for them, but unfortunately some of the sales practices that are happening are simply leading to them getting stuck in 2-year plans that are way more than they can afford, with way more than they need. And so, what's wrong with their old phone? And that, they get sold on the latest iPhone that they don't really need. And so, those sorts of practices we've been hearing from seniors as well. Was there anything else that you wanted to add to that, Toby? No, thank you.
So that seems to be the biggest gap, then.
Yeah, and also the need for plans that are suitable for seniors. And I think if you look at Exhibit C or 3, for example, I think some of those plans may be worth looking at if you do consider mandating the low-cost plans that seniors or vulnerable people need. These types of plans might be more suitable. We don't want to speak to the specific plans because I think you're hearing evidence from a lot of experts and people who understand these areas, and that's great, and that's what the CRTC should do. We're looking at the results and what people are asking for, and that's why we're here. We're here to convey to you what we heard from seniors.
What do you think needs to be changed to address that? Is it something that could be handled by more competition in the market?
Sure. I mean, there's really the two main areas that we're asking for is more competition in the market. And certainly that would help. If prices generally are lower, that would help. But also low-cost cell phone plans for vulnerable groups, in addition to that, would be very helpful.
As part of your survey, did you look at how many different providers there are in the communities across BC, how many different, even the flanker brands, the different kinds of programs? Did you do any kind of survey about the broad range of offerings in the province?
Just so you know, we did the survey, and that was a public survey, but we also did a number of stakeholder meetings as well with a number of different groups. Now, that doesn't necessarily factor into the report because that was primarily on the survey itself. But as a team, our group that was looking at this did go out and met with telecoms, met with associations and groups, consumer groups that were interested. And so we did have a sort of a broader look at it. But Toby, please, if you want to get into the specifics of the survey.
The survey didn't, again, cover the lower cost plans, but I think part of what the government is doing currently and has been doing is actually looking to see what the availability is, and I know the CRTC has these exhibits as well as part of these hearings, and they're very helpful for us as well. We were looking more just in terms of not so much an exhaustive list, but we were just seeing what was available and how to kind of reconcile, as the questions are today, how to reconcile what we've heard with what the marketplace has. And we don't have a definitive answer on that, and I think we're still looking at that question.
And one of the things that did come up, if I may, on the survey was this idea of there being need to be more options and flexibility. And one of the things with the lower cost plans is they're very rigid in terms of what they provide, and they aren't necessarily meeting the needs. And I think that's key, because there is this disconnect that we heard between people perceiving, hey, we're not getting the pricing that we want and the services that we want. And that seemed loud and clear in the survey, and that sort of plays into it. But as Toby said, we didn't specifically ask about these low-cost plans.
Was there a particular service that they felt was particularly problematic?
I don't think that was covered in the survey, no.
Okay. Now, as a province, you have various programs, particularly for low-income individuals. As part of, for instance, the assistance that you provide to low-income folks in BC, do you, when you put together the basket of goods that are required, do you allow for cell phone service or some sort of communication service as part of that basket that you need to that people need in order to survive?
There's, as you can appreciate, there's different departments within the province, and I'll try and answer as best I can. I don't think I can answer that definitively, but I do know that there are programs for individuals. When that became, when that was raised with us is there are youth who are transitioning out of care, and there are service providers that are providing a service or as part of a program, they are providing that service. There's probably similar type of services for lower income individuals, and I'm just not certain if there is something specifically that we include as a basket of services for low income individuals. But I think the overall point we're trying to make is it's not so much the very low income people. There is a broader group. Seniors are one. There are some individuals that we are calling some vulnerable individuals, population, seniors and others in lower income, that are just not getting what they feel is a service they need from a wireless plan.
We've heard about the TELUS plan that offered a free phone and service to children in care who are under 26 for 2 years after they.
And I think it's worth mentioning that MCFD, which is the ministry that deals with children's services, actually piloted that project. So that's an example of government and telecoms working together, and we have that happening quite a bit. For example, in connectivity in British Columbia, in rural and remote areas. That's a very important consideration. I think it's also important for the CRTC to take that into account when you're looking at competition and affordability, because we want to make sure that that same affordability is available and connectivity is available in rural and remote areas. So those are the kinds of things where we are working with the telecoms in British Columbia to provide that connectivity. So we have to take all of these, you have to take all of these pieces and take them into account when you're looking at competition. But I did want to add, though, we were talking about seniors and vulnerable people, but we also have to talk about families. And we heard from families. We heard from just regular folk who feel that they're paying way too much for cell phones. And that's part of the request for greater competition. And so I think we have looked at some specific issues around vulnerable and seniors and others, but I wouldn't want to de-emphasize the request for potential more competition to allow more pricing to come down.
ISED had a Connecting Families initiative that was designed to connect hundreds of thousands of low-income Canadian families to the internet. And in that instance, participating internet service providers voluntarily contributed to the initiative by offering $10 internet service to eligible families. And the eligibility was determined by families that received the maximum amount of the Canada Child Benefit. Do you think a similar approach could be taken for mobile wireless services, particularly as you have just referenced the needs of families?
Well, I think there's, when the CRTC looks at all the different issues in front of them, those kinds of programs are certainly worth looking at. And I think there's a multiplicity of issues around affordability that have to be looked at, and a number of different solutions to that. And one of those, of course, is mandating the lower cost, low usage plans. But of course, there's other options that are being put in front of the CRTC, and we encourage you to look at all of those in making your determination. Roman, did you?
I'll just add to that. So the CRTC recognized internet access as almost a lifeline, required access. I think certainly cellular service probably is even more important. So to have those kind of programs would be very beneficial from a social perspective.
Do you see the difficulties between the urban-rural divide? I know that we had ExploreNet in, and they said they didn't actually participate in this program because when you're talking about incomes, rural versus urban, in their rural areas, they would have been covering 65% of their market with this program. And that just was not economically feasible for them. So do you have any notions about how we would deal with the dichotomy between the two?
Yeah, and I think that's why I brought it up. I think it's very important to make sure that we have connectivity issues in British Columbia, and we have the access issues for in rural and remote areas, and we want to make sure one of the problems, of course, is we heard about 5G. If it becomes an urban phenomenon to the exclusion of rural, then we're creating more of that divide, and that's not a good thing. So I think it's really important for the CRTC. We would probably submit that it would be very important to take those considerations into account when looking at affordability, because if certain measures are taken that somehow affect rural and remote areas from getting connectivity or affordable cell phone service, that's an issue, and I think it's really important to look at. Very important, because we want to make sure that this pricing is available and in rural areas and remote areas as well. It's not just, and I appreciate the fact that it costs more when you have less people per square kilometer. I get that, and so we have to, I think that's where the CRT has to find the balance. I think that's something that we encourage you to look at, is find that balance. Did you want to add? Are you good? Okay, sorry. Oh.
As a province, you make certain programs and government assistance available through various means tests, I would assume. How feasible do you think it is for a regulator like the Commission to implement such a program?
Do you mean which program, just so I'm clear?
A means-tested low-income program.
Well, I certainly, yeah, I certainly think it's quite doable. I mean, it's certainly looked at in many other types of programs. So I don't see why it would be any different for this.
Would it be more sensible to simply mandate a low-cost plan for all Canadians regardless of income?
Well, I think as long as those plans meet the needs of the users, that would be my only concern. If sure, fantastic. If there was lower cost plans that met everyone's needs, that's the best case scenario. That'd be very great. You know, that would make sense because people are getting more affordable cell phone access, are getting the type of service that they need, not more than they need. So, which is important, and I think to get to there, it would be a great place to be because, as I said, we are talking about vulnerable and seniors and low-income people, but we're also talking about, you know, middle income Canadians as well who are struggling paycheck to paycheck in their families. And as we said, that one example where, you know, it was the amount of their cell phone bill for their family was the same as their food bill. And that's a real burden on families, and that's something that I think the CRTC should really take into account.
How do we then assess the needs of consumers and decide on the characteristics of, say, a mandated plan? How would we assess the needs?
That's a very good question. And I'm sure that as the expert, she will do very well in coming up with that.
Oh, yes.
Ask him a question.
Nice rally.
Sorry. I can't help myself. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee, so I'm not used to being on this side, so I can apologize. Yeah.
You're more used to saying no. Just finally, do you think that plans should be, a low-cost, more responsive plan, responsive to people's needs, should be on a prepaid basis so that people with credit issues wouldn't be denied access to such plans?
That's a very good point. I think one of the problems that we heard from the survey was that a lot of the prepaid the prepaid plans were actually problematic because they ended up being used by people of lower incomes and seniors, and they ended up usually being higher in cost. And then credits weren't used, and then they disappeared, and things like that. So we'd want to make, if that was the case, we want to make sure that that it was very clear, how that would work, and so there would be fairness for consumers on that. I think some of the challenges with that would be the cost of phones. We did hear from telecoms that one of the biggest costs, of course, is the cost of the devices now, up to $1,500 for devices, and that that could present some issues in terms of doing a month-to-month type approach. Mind you, if they were using older phones or not the latest thing, that might work. But I think there would be challenges with that in terms of amortizing costs over a period of time and making it. I don't know how the telecoms would get to that affordability if it wasn't amortized over a certain period of time. And I think that's part of the reason why the month-to-month is more expensive. So I think there's challenges with that. It would be great, but I think there's challenges with that.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the efforts that the province of British Columbia went through to do such an extensive survey and to send us the results and make your presentation, travel all this way and make your presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Commissioner Lacey.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Oh, I thought we were done.
The CRTC report on missing and misleading and aggressive sales practices was published in mid-February 2019. Could you tell me again when the data was collected for your survey? Was it before or after that?
It was the end of May to early July was the time period that the survey was opened. And so the perceptions, we did ask respondents to go back within 2 years of their experiences with their cell phone plans for consideration of the responses.
Well, I find it very disconcerting that you've seen some of the complaints that we heard during our hearing, which was before our report was published, about being upsold and other issues that seem to be continuing into the summer of 2019. Do you have any plans to redo that survey?
Not at this time. I think there's so many different areas where we can dive into. I think at the moment we're just trying to digest what we have and as you say, do further research, talk to more people, but not at this time in terms of replicating the survey.
You had some recommendations with respect to a review of the wireless code, and in your review of the responses and comments you received, did you see that there was a problem of non-compliance with the wireless code or a problem of gaps in the wireless code that need to be addressed?
I would say both. And a third one is just the lack of knowledge of its existence. And I appreciate that efforts have been made by the CRTC and others to make sure consumers are aware of the wireless code, but it was shocking how few people actually knew it existed or the CCTS existed, and that's a real issue. So education is sort of another pillar we haven't really talked about today, but I think as far as the rights and remedies that are available to people, I think that's an important piece that we might be able to help with too. I think provinces might have a role in education and working with the CRTC and the CCTS to try to make sure consumers are aware of their rights. But there are some issues. I'll give you an example, a gap. I've been a lawyer for 30 years, and I don't think I've ever told a client, I can't imagine telling a client to sign a contract they've never seen. And that, the wireless code says, yes, you have to give the contract immediately to the person, but that's after they've signed it. You know, so they're not reviewing the contract. They might have the summary, but they're not actually reviewing the contract. And in the case of over the phone, it's 15 days later. Now, I know there's remedies if they subsequently read it, and they can. I appreciate those things in there, but quite frankly, we've seen that's a gap. That's a gap. You know, consumers should have the contract before they sign it and should be able to review it. I think that's just a basic issue, and I can understand the telecom saying, well, that might affect our competitiveness and people might go and shop around. Well, good, you know, quite frankly. So, I think with the wireless code, there are some issues. We can follow up. Obviously, there's going to be a whole wireless code review in 2 years, or is it 2022? So that'll be coming up, and we're obviously happy to answer any questions in the interim. And we would, again, really encourage the CRTC to expedite the review of the wireless code because, as we know, telecom, any kind of technology moves much faster than government. And by the time you have the review and those recommendations are put into force, it could be 3 years from now. So that was just one example of a few examples that came forth with the wireless code in regards to gaps. So yes. And there was a third. Sorry, my apologies. There was the gap, and then there was.
Whether it was an issue of a gap or non-compliance with the terms of the wireless code. And you said, I think you said you thought they were both.
Yeah, as far as the non-compliance, I mean, there are some really great things in the wireless code, and I think part of it is, and this is one of the things with the CCTS, and it's a wonderful organization. It's hearing people's complaints and it's resolving them, and but the problem is with the CCTS, in my humble opinion, is that, or our opinion, I keep saying me, I apologize, is that it's transactional. So if the CCTS finds something that's systemically wrong, they can't act on it. And that's, I think, a gap. Now, that's different, of course, in the wireless code, but that's an example, I think, of a gap with the CCTS, is that if the CCTS found something that was a systemic issue, like aggressive sales practices by a particular group, they can only act on that one thing. They can't act for the country. And so those, again, that's one example of a gap that we saw.
Thank you. Did you receive any comments related to confidence in the quality of of lower cost brands, flanker brands. We had talked to some of the, we talked to TELUS and Bell about the fact that in our survey, one of the comments we received was that people didn't have confidence in low-cost plans that were on flankers, actually owned by the national MNOs, but the consumer didn't realize that these brands were riding on the same networks. Did you get any comments of that nature?
Toby, you want to?
I think it speaks generally to that issue of awareness, not specifically, to answer your question, not directly, but I think it answers, I think what we were hearing is it's the general awareness of the lower cost plans or even the flanker brands.
Was not there.
It's not there. And I think even though at the government staff level, you know, we're not immersed in the telecom issues like the CRTC or I said, but even our look at it, we found we had to connect the dots. It wasn't clear. If you're in this field, in the telecom field, and you know and you do your research, then you would know. And I'm just thinking the average consumer, the average person, or someone who's looking for not necessarily a deal, but a lower cost plan, they will have a hard time making heads or tails of it unless they do the work, unless they do the research into this. And same for the prepaid plans as well.
And my last question is related to the issue of low cost, low data usage. I think you mentioned the example of seniors who may just need occasional use, emergency use cell phone, but they don't need large data. When Mr. Noss of Two Cows was before us earlier this week, he was of the view that persons on low income may not even have internet access in their home, and that for them, their mobile phone data usage is really important because it may be their only way to access online services, as you mentioned. Did you get any comments of that nature from that demographic?
Well, I don't know. That sounds like a really good sales tactic to upsell someone on data to me. I mean, quite frankly. But Toby, I don't think we heard anything specifically on that, did we? Or no? I think we sometimes hear issues around affordability.
To Mr. Noss, I think he was.
No, I appreciate it. I don't mean to be flippant with that.
He was positing that someone may have a choice. I can't afford both home internet and a phone. The phone is more important to me, and that'll be my means of getting on the internet. So
yeah, and we're worried about having to make the choice between the phone and food. You know, I mean, with seniors because they have a fixed income and the cost of living. I mean, especially in British Columbia, it's throughout Canada, but certainly in the Lower Mainland is extremely high. And people on fixed incomes are having to make choices. And I said one senior at the end of each month is making that really tough choice. Can I afford another month of cell phone? And they need that because it isn't a luxury anymore, really. And to be fair, I was a bit unfair to your comment on that, but I agree that people who are struggling financially are having to make choices on things that everybody else is using all the time, and that's really problematic. And that's part of this entire discussion, and it's something that the CRTC really has to examine when you're looking at all this, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See, she doesn't want me to go on, I can tell. Thank you very much. Just a comment, and I think we are done. I do again thank you once more for coming to share your experience with us. You mentioned something I was going to raise, which was can provincial and other governments play a role too in the education? I think consumer awareness is clearly emerging as a theme awareness of low-cost options, awareness of this CCTS, the wireless code, and so on. So I would indeed encourage you and your confreres in government to consider how that might be done. And if you wish to submit any suggestions to us in that regard about awareness, would be happy to accept it by undertaking. I think the due date is 10th of March, if you had any additional submissions in that regard.
We'd be happy to, Chair. That's a really good suggestion.
We'd appreciate seeing them. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
We
Chair.
will adjourn for the day, for the week, and resume Monday morning, 9 a.m. Madame la Secrétaire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next Monday, yes, at 9 a.m.